All right. So there's a lot of different ways to visualize security, right? We've talked a little bit about the CIA triad, a little bit of other stuff, these different tools or techniques that we have to visualize security, to start documenting things, to start writing down what we're planning on doing and maybe the effectiveness of things that we've decided to do. And one tool that I quite like that I've developed with a lot of my peers over the years is this solution matrix. And I never really came up with a particularly good name for this solution matrix. So I just call it the MikeDan's solution matrix because I'm conceited and I wanted to name something after me, frankly. There is no better name. I've had people throw acronyms at me. Usually they're obscene acronyms. So we'll just stick with the solution matrix here. And the important thing to remember is it all comes from a core belief that I have that many security professionals share around the fact that all security controls, anything you can do to manage security, to reduce risk, to minimize threat, to minimize vulnerabilities, all that always is going to be a trade-off. There's always some balance. You take away from one thing to get another thing. So when I envision security controls, whether it's putting a firewall up to stop an attack from the internet, or implementing a new type of VPN encryption, or locking down a computer in a specific way physically or virtually, some kind of settings, even something as nebulous and soft as something like password policy, making a minimum password length change from 6-character minimum to 10-character minimum. All of these different things that we do to control security or to hopefully increase security have really 3 different aspects that I like to think about, and they wind up being a trade-off. I tend to map them out right here with this kind of matrix, where the solution maps out into this control or this whoa. I'll go forward again. In fact, I'll go forward over here so I don't mess it up again. What happens here is that we map out security, or I map out security controls. These are solutions or things that we use to minimize threat, minimize risk, increase security into this kind of matrix. Is it going to increase security? Sure. Most of the security controls or things we think about do increase security. Theoretically or realistically, they do. But what effect do they have on usability? How hard is a system? Or a control. I mentioned earlier the concept of going from 6-character passwords to 10-character passwords, which would increase security potentially, theoretically, against some types of attacks, but would also decrease usability. It's harder to remember a 10-character password or a 12-character password than it is a 6 or 8-character password. It's harder to remember a password that requires uppercase, lowercase, numbers, non-alphanumeric, kanji characters, hieroglyphics, whatever you've got in your password requirements. Those things have great impacts on security, but horrible impacts on usability. So the solution moves away from the usability side. And then the third aspect here is the cost effectiveness. So oftentimes when we implement security controls, whether they have an impact on usability or not, they have a direct cost-effective nature. There are some solutions that are exceptionally expensive to deploy, like some of these next-generation firewalls or context-sensitive or context-specific security network reduction techniques, like these kind of next-gen firewall /router IDS IPS devices. They're fantastic devices, don't get me wrong, but when you're spending 6 figures on a device, you're definitely increasing security and you're increasing usability, but you're potentially not getting a lot of cost effectiveness compared to a $500 or $1,000 intrusion detection system, hardware-based intrusion detection system. So the cost effectiveness winds up getting reduced as the security and usability get increased. That's the tricky bit. So whenever I'm looking at a solution, whatever it is, again, hard solution like a piece of hardware, a new intrusion detection system, or something more soft like a network configuration setting, password length, or account lockout policy, stuff like that, or anything in between, I tend to want to think about these 3 aspects and then plot a point. right there on the little matrix of is security, our usability, cost effectiveness, how are they balancing each other? Oftentimes, I get challenged on this matrix, and the chief challenge I hear is, but Mike, the cost effectiveness is all relative. Well, sure. Actually, all three are relative. Increased security is relative. It's very contextual. It depends on the scenario. It depends on your environment. Usability, you might have an employee base that's comprised entirely of geniuses that have no problem with any type of nasty usability or nasty character-based interface or horrible security configuration. You might have a user base unique to probably your environment that don't mind sticking their eyes in retina scanners whenever they want to log on or make a network connection. That's great. It's a horrible usability scenario for some people, for most people, but for others it might not be that bad. So it's very context sensitive. It's very much so based on your users, where your environment is, what kind of requirements you have, as to where a solution will actually map on this matrix. This isn't necessarily a quantitative measure, it's a qualitative measure, but it does reinforce the concept of thinking about these three things whenever you're thinking about implementing a control, and then making sure you implement the right kind of security control in your environment.